everybody, DJ Lou here, and up next we're going to talk about a project I've been working on for some time, re-ripping my CD collection and swapping out my old songs in my library. So this is going to be a little different perspective than what you're normally used to. I'm going to give you my screen capture of everything that I'm doing, throw my image over here on the corner, and I'm going to go through each step of the process of what I've been doing to re-rip my collection, what programs I'm using, how to tag them properly, and then starting to compare those songs with what's in my original library and then swapping out the old song. So I can't lie, this is an extensive project. It's very time intensive, but I really wanted to make sure that my CD collection I had was archived properly, but with lossless rips. So after doing onesies and twosies for quite some time, I just decided, I'll grab 10, 20, 30, 40 CDs at a time and just rip them throughout the day. Every waking moment that I had, I was, coming over, setting settings to make it as easy as possible to automate a lot of the process. And in the end, I finally got my last CDs ripped up. It's like, I guess, the beginning of February. And now I've been going through the process of looking at all my old files and, finding my new files and swapping them, deleting the old ones, tagging them. So I'm going to go through this whole entire process that I'm doing. Will hopefully save you time if you think on taking on a project like this. And let's just jump into it. So one of the first things you'll see in this is I have Virtual DJ that I've been using for some time. It's definitely a great music management tool to have. So I've been using this kind of, at least as my baseline. If you notice up here on top, I'm still using Jaikoz. It's up to version 10 now. I do have the pro version of this. I want to say the license I think is $50. And especially if you're going to be doing lots of bulk editing and whatnot, this is the tool to use. I haven't found anything quite like this out there, and it has automated a lot of the process, especially when I'm doing huge 100, 200, 500,000, 10,000 songs. I can quickly scan them, do what I want to do, and it will actually come in extraordinarily handy at the end of this process. I'm also using a program called XLD. This is a great ripper for the Mac. There's plenty of rippers both for Mac and PC out there. What's strange enough, XLD doesn't have an initial GUI right off the bat. You'll go into the settings to make your changes and all that, but you actually don't see things pop up until you pop in a CD. On top of all that, I have a designated location for where things are going to rip. I'm actually ripping everything to my local drive. It doesn't really matter what drive that you have, but just in case if I didn't have one of my externals handy, I just wanted to have it, put everything local. I'll process everything local, and then when I'm ready to move it over to my external, I'm good to go on that. On my Mac, because of course, Macs really just don't have optical drives anymore. I am using a Samsung external CD reader. Actually, I think it's a writer as well. I haven't written a CD in ages. But this is a well performer. It hooks up via USB. Again, it's a slow process to rip a CD. At best, you get 16x out of it. There are some CDs, especially when you do like error correction and all that, they can rip even under 1x if you have something really scratched and whatnot. But they many times can recover CDs that are heavily scratched. You'll just keep on rereading off of it. And so if you do have some damaged CDs, all hope is not lost. It might not get it at all, but at least there's some path to potentially do it. Now, since I've already re-ripped my collection, I actually went in. I noticed I actually had a bad rip on one of them because I actually have two Public Enemy. It takes a nation of millions to hold us back. One is the explicit version that was bought at a record store. This one was actually way back in the days of Columbia House. So shout outs to people who still remember that. So I'm going to actually re-rip both of these. So I have a clean copy and explicit copy, and we'll go through that process. All right, before we start to rip, we're going to go into the XLD preferences. I'm going to go through each one of these screens just to show you what settings I am using. I have chose Apple Lossless as my selection. Now, You can easily choose FLAC or any of the other formats that you would like. Some people swear by WAV. Some people still just want MP3s. Some people like Ogg Vorbis. It comes down to preference. In general, my thought process on this is anything that gets ripped nowadays would be FLAC or Apple lossless. I've chosen Apple lossless just in case if I ever want to play this. I still have a classic iPod hanging around. I still got my phone that I might sync up, once in a blue moon. So this would be the most compatible format in that case. Since lossless doesn't really do much anything different in its rips, you can make some of these changes, but it doesn't make any sense. You want to keep your sample rate original, unless maybe you're doing an SACD and you want to downscale it, but otherwise, bit depth, again, no real reason to change that unless you were again downscaling. If you wanted to do that, I couldn't imagine somebody wanting to do that. It does have an embed cue sheet as a chapter. So some people like to rip the CDs just as a whole CD as opposed to individual files. These are people usually doing like media servers, and they rather have just a single major file with the cue sheet attached to it. Definitely not something I'm going for. You can choose the output directory that you want to go to. Again, I've chosen my local directory on my SSD. Your mileage may vary on where you want to put this. Most of these you don't really want to change out of this. Maximum threads, if you max it out, you could actually really start to degrade the performance of your machine if you're trying to do anything else in the background while this is happening. So keeping this in the same default modes, you're totally fine. If you want to put this in iTunes. Now, I don't use iTunes anymore. I broke away from that some time ago, but you can actually bring these all directly into it if you want, but I just don't use it at all. File naming schemes. Now, I will see if I can find the link to what the actual codes of this is. I've chosen, in this case, capital A is album, capital T is track, name, so the name of the artist, the album again, and the title. So I'm making a folder, a subfolder, and then naming the file itself. This ultimately will change. I just put this in there just for posterity's sake, but when I process this in Jaikoz, I actually have a different rule that's set in there. So you could keep this default if you want, but if you are not using Jaikoz and you were just straight ripping these and then do further tagging from that, unless you're doing it maybe in Virtual DJ directly, you could keep this default if you would choose. Batching, I don't do anything specific in batching. CCDB, this will automatically go retrieve the information from databases that are out there. So I'll bring the artist, the title, year into the RIP. I do this. I actually don't need to because Jaikoz will actually find it. It will actually read the length of the tracks. It will also capture a couple other pieces of other embedded metadata that's actually in there from the original RIP, and be able to process and throw in all my tags. But I give it a little bit of a push and make sure that they're actually named properly out of the gate. Metadata. So I believe most of these are actually already processed. It adds tags to it, embeds the cover art. Otherwise, it would place the cover art in a separate location. Again, all these are default as I use it. Now, CD rip. You can actually choose 3 different modes by default. I'm not mistaken, it's XLD Secure Ripper. That's what I've been using for some time. UC2 error is not ticked, and I just haven't needed this. I think there's certain drives that do require this if you're actually using it, but mine has not. Again, this is all default read samples, so this way it'll kind of resample over it, and it will set it automatically. Automatic drive speed I recommend, because if you can max out the speed of the RIP, that's great, but then if there are problems with it, then you want to get it to, you want the speediest process. Unless you've got all the time in the world, then sure, limit it to 1x and it'll take 35, 40, 45 minutes per rip. But On average, my rips, I want to say, have been 10 minutes, give or take. Some of them as low as like 4 or 5. But there's definitely some that I had like this one track. It took like 25, 30 minutes just for the one track because it was heavily scratched. But the program was able to capture it, which was awesome. I don't save log files or anything like that. Scan replay gain. So this I think is important because you automatically embed replay gain into the track. So I think that is very important. And for me, for the processing, this is not set by default. Automatically open disk on insertion, start ripping automatically, and don't start when metadata is applied. So with these three settings, as soon as I put a CD in, it's going to query against, in this case, I think this is the MusicBrainz database. It'll read the first tag off of it and automatically pick the first tag. Now, if you don't choose that, you will get a nag screen that comes up of all the matches it's made because, there are sometimes, different uploads and sometimes, spelling corrections and all that. Since I am post-processing all this in Jaikoz on top of my entire process, it's just not necessary. So basically I get to insert the CD, let it burn, and that's it. And everything's tagged up. It'll jack the CD when it's done, which I do believe this is by default. I don't quit the application because, when I'm doing bulk editing, what's the sense? So these are the major settings. You can actually burn CDs out of this as well, but I don't use that. But those are my preferences that I use for XLD. If you use another program, I would choose probably something in a similar realm because you want that automation, especially if you're, 100, 200, 300 ripped CDs is just going to take a long time. I had somewhere north of, I think it was actually over 1,000. I had like 700 in my collection, plus I actually went to my attic to some of these older CDs that I had that were kind of dinged up and all. And I was able to recover most of those as well. So, when you're doing that much, you do not want to slow down the process at all because it's such a tedious process. So let's pop in a CD. Right now I have the explicit version of Public Enemy. And initially you'll see that it's going to pop up a screen for pre-gap analysis. Now the pre-gap analysis will check that initial trailing audio coming in and then trim it. And for me, I think that's important because I don't want to necessarily have that 1, 2, 3 seconds of that some CD mastering over the years has baked into it. I know a lot, especially like a lot of greatest hits CDs just seem to have that. I think it was just poor mastering in the end. But so I let pre-gap do its thing. And then sometimes it'll still take 10, 15 seconds. Sometimes it'll actually take a couple minutes depending how damaged the CD is and whatnot. So let's rip Public Enemy.
Many hours later.
All right, my ripping is done now. It took just a little over 30 minutes. I had a quick pause as I did some additional housework. But now that I'm getting back into this, as you see, it's created 2 folders. I actually renamed the first one explicit, so it just reminds me that was my explicit copy. So I'm going to bring these in individually because I'm actually going to do an additional thing that I normally don't necessarily do because I don't have a lot of CDs. I have 2 copies of a clean and explicit version. I'm going to bring this over. This is the explicit version. And as you see here, it's pulled in the tag information that I need. Now, I'm going to do a couple extra bits of tagging in this. Now, normally, if this was kind of an ambiguous rip that I had, I can actually do a full check against this. It'll go query the servers and pull information back. Matter of fact, we might as well just do this on this just to show. It's going to query both MusicBrainz and Discogs to do corrections. It will look at the year, and as you see, it initially checked it as 1995. It was actually probably the last rip that came out of it. Now it's going to recheck it, and it'll actually produce the earliest date. And I actually have a whole bunch of settings in Jaikoz I'll quickly go over, but it's pulled whatever releases that came out of it. Now, I'm going to simplify this because the rules that I've created will actually create different folders based off the years. I put years in my folders of the individual albums, so this way they can always be sorted chronologically if I'm looking into it. So in this case, because I'm a little bit less important in the actual release date of the track, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to copy that and bring it over into everything. And everything you can bulk select, copy and paste and whatnot. Now, it automatically checks composer, and I don't use the composer field for this information. I use my shortcuts, and definitely check out my other video on how I use short codes, because I have everything from my personal ratings to if it's a danceable track for a wedding, a cocktail or dinner song and whatnot. I'm going to be using the information I already have from my previous tags to bring that over into these fields. So composer, I am just wiping out. Now, one thing that you'll notice if you do use Jaikoz, it does its best to pull from both MusicBrainz and Discogs for genres and subgenres. Now, I've created my own personal mental rule of just having the very, very core genres, in this case, like hip hop, R&B, pop, rock, jazz, classical, Latin. And so I just use those main folders. It keeps it nice and simple. So I'm going to rename my genre hip hop and bring it over. Now for grouping, there's a couple things I'm going to think about this. PE is definitely conscious, so it did bring that over properly. But this is also, it throws East Coast in there. It keeps on saying hip hop a couple times, keeps on saying rap. I don't use rap as a tag. On top of all this, I add a tag in my for my own preference for golden age. So I can always query that 86 to 96 kind of era for golden age hip hop, and this way when I'm typing in tags golden age, I get everything that comes from that era. So I'm going to just go ahead. We'll start with conscious. This is East Coast. I actually normally put commas to separate. And this is also golden age. And I'm going to bring that, copy and paste it across all the fields. And again, this is one of the beauties of Jaikoz, that you can do a lot of this copy and pasting on the fields. Comments, I usually only use this now for if I'm doing sample digging. So if there's a particular song that I knew sampled or was sampled or sampled something, I put it in the comment field. So this gives me a little bit of flexibility if I'm doing one of those events where they want to hear the old and the new and all that. And it gives me additional information that works well, the transition and all that. But I'm not going to worry about anything in there right now. For compilation, I keep this field up there. If I have greatest hits albums and all that, it actually uses a different field that it reads off of to place things in their proper folders and renames things properly. In this case, because in a compilation the years would change, this now takes and ignores the year information and just puts in the album title. So this way things don't get disorganized and thrown over 4, 10, 15 different folders. But since this is not a compilation, I don't have to worry about that. It's got the track total as well. And I do use a custom field that no other major program like Serato or Virtual DJ or even some of the other oddball programs like Swinsayan uses. This just kind of reminds me of, I ripped it recently. These are all my new rips. So I just tagged this PC for Paris Creative, and I'm going to copy and paste that as well. So this information is always in that custom tag, and it always gives me a point of reference, some point in the future if I ever need to do something again. Hopefully this is the last time I do rips. I don't imagine me going beyond lossless codec ripping. So there's going to be 2 additional things that I do on this that I wouldn't necessarily do right away, but I do know this is an explicit rip, and I do have a clean rip of another. So in my composer field, I'm just going to tag all these explicit, just so I have that information right off the bat. And in addition, in my title field, I can go in and edit, and then I can set value at end. Type in explicit. And it just reminds me, these are these versions. On my rules here in Jaikoz, it's actually going to take my metadata information and rename everything. So everything will be tagged explicit on it. So for future reference, I never have a confusion of clean versus not clean. Now, I don't want to get into a lot of depth on this because Jaikoz is an enigma in itself. Lots and lots of customization. But for some of the basics on this, you can go into table and enable these fields. And again, the fields that I'm using right now, I see the artwork that comes in, the title of the artist, album artist as well. And that's actually important because in my particular rule, I'm using album artist to create the root folder for these albums. And if I had, let's say, Public Enemy featuring Hank Shockley or something, if he happened to be on it, if I had it as artists and also as album artists, it would create two separate folders for that. So for automation purpose, album artist is always just the album artist, and then if there's any featured artist, it goes into just the artist folder. Now, Virtual DJ does not have album artists available. I honestly can't remember if Serato does or not. I know it definitely, of course, has artists. I can't remember if it uses album artists as well, but for my purposes, especially for this archival piece, having album artists is critical for my automation and making sure that's clean. And you will see, especially with like some of the greatest hits and a lot of these duos and group pieces with a featured artist, that sometimes it will copy over properly and sometimes it won't. So it at least gives you that initial opportunity to quickly bulk change everything and get it right the first time. Album, year, my composer field, and again, I if I was really going deep within Jaikoz and tagging everything, I'd be putting all my short codes in here, but in this purpose, I'm using Virtual DJ to finish that up. Genre, my groupings, my comment field, compilation, track numbers, and the custom field. What's truly important in this, for my automation purposes, is rename folder from metadata and rename file from metadata. And one thing that you might notice off the bat, if you're a JavaScript person, is I've actually commented out fields. And the reason is I actually have two major rule sets using Jaikoz. The first one is for my lean library. So the top one that's commented out right now here, we see genre and folder separator. This is for when I'm saving everything into the lean library. So it looks at the genre field. If it's not there, it creates it, and then creates a folder separator so you know it's an actual folder itself. If this isn't going to my lean library, and right now I don't want this to, this is going to my, my regular archive library, I have it pulling album artists, and then it adds the folder separator so we know this is a folder. Then it adds year in brackets, so I have to double quote this for anything that I'm bringing literal text over, and then it adds year and then ends that. And then it adds a space in there, and then album. So this is creating album artist, in this case Public Enemy, as a folder, is taking the year as a bracketed year into it, and then adding the album name. So again, this allows me to chronologically sort as needed. If this happened to be a compilation, if that checkbox is ticked over there, then a slightly different rule, pulls album artist again, and then actually creates a folder, and then creates the album artist again as well with a hyphen, and then album and folder separator. And again, I wanted to take the year out of the equation, but I also wanted to make sure that all the proper things, in case if this happened to be various artists, that was listed as album artists, and I use that for all the major compilation albums out there as various artists. So this way they're all just kind of together, as opposed to now, 50, 60 different artists off of maybe say 10 greatest hits and compilation albums, and scattering them everywhere. So all my compilations stay as various artists in that regard. Puts the album artist in there, then puts the artist in there, and then the name. So that keeps everything organized from a folder perspective. And then file-wise, you'll see there's a little bit of complexity in this, but if it's going to my lean library, first is putting the artist name in there, and for some reason it doesn't exist. It actually pulls over the album artist into it. It's putting in the year of the track, and on top of all that, the title. So it keeps things nice and simple, especially for my my lean library. more importantly, is seeing just the artist, the track, and the year, as opposed to any other information like the track number and whatnot. For my permanent archive, it's more important to see the actual track number and then the artist and title. So that's the way I do that when I'm doing my archive file. So again, Whack Whack uses, actually comments out that field. And when I need to, I flip between the two depending what kind of processing I'm doing for the day. Same thing kind of goes with compilation. There's really no change when I'm doing compilations for file naming because there's just no need to make a change from that. This represents so much of ease of use once you've learned Jaikoz and all this for automation purposes. There's so much that can be quickly done within the application that just allows me to just dive in, bring things over, process on to the next. And when you're doing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of CDs or potentially thousands of CDs, this is where it's at. Now, Jaikoz is not perfect, especially if you're pulling some of, like some of the old pool CDs. I actually pulled a couple from my old collection, and sometimes they would work, sometimes they wouldn't. I did notice also some of my old Columbia House purchases way back when they just either weren't tagged properly or all that, and sometimes you just wouldn't find the information. So it's not 100%, but the amount of ease that this allows is, even with its warts, even when it doesn't work at 100%, some of the additional features like the bulk copying and the processing just, makes this application just a peach to use. So I'm going to now take this information. I'm going to select all the tracks. And then I've actually brought over actually 4, but in this case I'm going to be using 3 of the most important features. I'm correcting the file names from metadata, so it's going to rename those files. It's going to process what folders they need to go into. Then it's going to save and move them. Now, in the future, I'll do a quick example at the end of this video. When I'm copying back to my lean library, I'm going to change my tags over in Jaikoz to my lean library side. And then instead of that, I'm going to be doing a save and copy. So this way, I'm only copying over the information to the lean library. My archive stays where it's at. And that's it. A couple of other icons you'll see here. Most of these are default. The snowflake gets rid of white space characters. So if you had some really improperly tagged stuff and you're just kind of cleaning things up, that really helps. These are all individual going against Discogs or Music Brains, acoustic ID as well. If you do, in this case, Command 1, like I did a little while ago, it goes through the entire rigmarole of acoustic ID, then checks Music Brains, then checks Discogs. So it compiles it across many sources to get all this information. So I'm going to go ahead and process these. And I'm going to put them where I want them, and voila. Now, if you notice on the left side, the folder is deleted as well. So actually, there's a tick box in Jaikoz to delete folders when they're empty. Saves so much time from cleaning stuff up. And I'm going to go ahead and now do this with the clean version, and then I'll tag everything clean as well, like we had with the explicit version. So now we're done with this part. Now what we're going to do is take a look into Virtual DJ and start comparing what's in the current library and start parsing things out. All right, now that we've gotten everything into the library, what I'm going to do now is query Virtual DJ to look at the files that have come in now. Now, there's a couple things I can do. I can either I've got 2 favorites of my local hard drive library and my external. This does exist on the external. So I can easily just dive in, and I can either query this whole root folder, or I can dive in just to public enemy. But since the library isn't that massive, I'll just recurse the whole thing. I have shortcutted Command R for recurse, so it saves a couple mouse clicks. And now it has technically seen the file, but now we also want to make sure that we add it to the library, which I always forget. Add to search database. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go up to a different root folder just so it doesn't put that separator in virtual DJ. And just for the record, I'm only searching artist in this case. So this at least leans up this particular search. There's sometimes I'm going to be searching title and all that, but for the purposes of sorting out, in this case, Public Enemy, much easier just to select that. And also, if you don't know, you can narrow the search a little bit with quotes. So just in case if you have some other artists that happen to bleed over into it, you can sometimes narrow this down so this is a little bit more visible. So within this is my entire Public Enemy catalog, both on my external drive and my internal lean library. I've sorted everything out by title. And again, off the bat, if you see my other video on music management, I use short codes. I have created my own star ratings for my personal liking, what works on the dance floor, what works for cocktail and dinner, and some additional things like explicit versus clean. And then even as you see here with 911 as a joke, I put my vinyl collection in here. So this way I can actually use this library to kind of sort out things if I happen to be doing a vinyl gig. If you're not using the composer field right now, you could either use that with your current library. You can easily select all the songs, bring up your composer field, put a old as the title in it or something to that effect, just so it gives you some visual reference to work off of. If you don't do that, and at least your music is sorted properly by folder, like I have in this file path right here, you can see where my local library is versus my my new archive library. But I typically just go visually over the composer field because it kind of sticks out. And this is where I'm going to be starting to weed out my old rips and replacing them with the new rips. So in this case, and this isn't even what we just ripped, this was another rip I did, Fear of a Black Planet. As you see, I have old 263K bit rate, so it was probably a VBR bit rate that I did some time ago. But as you notice, there is some discrepancy on year and all that. So apparently when I pulled the information in Jaikoz, the information wasn't quite right. It probably pulled it from a newer release or something like that. So it's another thing I need to be cautious of. Now, I am meticulous with my tags, so years really matter. Maybe it doesn't to you. I definitely know some DJs don't even care about that. They're just worried really about artists and title, maybe a couple other small things like if it's a clean version or whatnot. But I'm meticulous with my titles, so it means a lot to me. So I have mapped a keyboard shortcut to make this a little easier for me. Command I brings up the tag editor. So as you can see here, it does show multiple values for the two or more songs that you've selected. I'm less worried about title and album because all it is capital versus lowercase changes, so I'm not worried about that. But I definitely want to bring composer over, so I'm bringing that field over, bringing in the original year as well, and also the grouping. Now I'm going to do a bulk change of grouping at the end just so everything is absolutely clean. But this at least gives me some premise to work off of. So now I'm going to hit OK. It's going to copy that information over. And now I'm going to go ahead, right click, and delete the original. As I'm doing this, one thing to also note is there are sometimes radio cut, 7-inch cut, different versions like Fight the Power. I not only have clean versions that are out there, but I also have tracks that came off, original soundtracks, in this case, Do the Right Thing. So what I'm going to do on this is try to make the decision call. Do I go with this 5-minute 24, which I'm not mistaken has a larger horn piece at the end? Do I go with the original album release? I think in this case, I'm going to go ahead and stick with the soundtrack release, and I always can query up and bring the other one if I want to. now that I have everything from the old rips now out of my original core library, I'm going to do a final bit of cleanup here and make sure that all the genres and groupings are proper. So one thing that will be a little bit interesting on this one is I'm actually also going to sort by year because, again, I'm doing Golden Age songs. I want to make sure that I tag those as well. And I actually noticed I have one that does not have a year, so I'm going to do this the hard way and look it up. And that came out, I think it was 93, yeah, 92. Tag this 1992. I'll resort so everything is back to where it is. Take everything up to 96. In this case, that. Make sure everything's labeled, in this case, hip hop. Make sure my groupings are where I want to be. Conscious, East Coast, and Golden Age. Let that do its magic for, it usually takes 10-15 seconds if it's a lot of files. I'm going to take my last songs, make this conscious. East Coast. So now I know that both my my archive library and my lean library all have the same information. So I'm actually going to skip because I actually haven't done this step yet, but I want to show what I'm going to do in the end, and that is to take all the music that's been tagged on my archive library and bring it over into my lean library. So I'm going to need to do a couple things here. First off, I am going to make sure I select a song that's in my archive. Step up 2 just so I can get to where I need to be, Public Enemy. And I'm going to drag it in. Now, from that, I'm also going to change my preferences. And I'm going to flip over to my lean library tags. So going back to genre and subfolder. Excuse me, genre, no subfolders in this. Take that out, comment this, take this out, and comment this. And this is actually something that I would be doing just once after I'm done with this entire process. I'm in about 3/4 of the way done, but it's still a long process. So now I'm going to sort by composer, and I'm going to look for my files that have my sort codes. I'm going to select. I don't have to worry about anything else on this. I am going to correct. And now instead of doing the save and move, I am now going to do a save and copy. It's going to tell me I only have certain rows selected. I'm going to click over to my main lean catalog, and voila. And now it's going to deposit these all in the hip hop subfolder, and we'll take a look at that just to make sure everything does it, because every now and then I make a mistake. And we're going to see by modify time that everything is going into the hip hop folder. And now I have a copy both locally for my archive on the hard drive and also on my SSD for my lean library. So with all that, that's about as efficient as a way as I can find to especially go through a bulk amount of songs to make sure I get rid of the old inferior rips where I can. One thing I will do is once I'm completely done with this, I'm going to sort through, see if I can find anything else that's living in that, at least below 320. Naturally, lossless, the better. But 320 is more than satisfactory. But I really don't want to go below that because I have found out over the years that especially when you're doing pitch manipulation, if I happen to do any scratching, which I do very little of, but there is still scratch techniques that I will do sometimes for transitions. And with those more inferior rips, you tend to get more artifacting and just some odd behavior at times. So I've hopefully have come up with this as quick as possible way to kind of prune your own library, get the new stuff in. Now, for some people, they're just working in just one single library, and they wouldn't have to go through that final step of bringing those files over to my local laptop. So in that case, you wouldn't have to complete that last step. You would just simply, whether you're tagging in Jaikoz itself for songs that you want to keep and whatnot. For some people, they do no tagging at all. They go completely off memory. They just want to be able to query artists and whatnot, and an even more quicker way to do it, because you don't have to worry about all that additional tagging and whatnot. All that being said, I hope this process has been as clear as possible. Naturally, if anybody has any questions, they know how to reach me on like Facebook Messenger, via email, and whatnot. But I hope this has kind of laid out at least some of the process that's required to do something of this caliber. Well, there's a video, and I know it's been a bit long, but I hope you enjoyed it. If you like this, click that thumbs up, hit subscribe, ding that notification bell. And if you happen to like videos like this, check out my 4 DJs Only playlist.